Well, I don't know how you spent your long weekend. I was digging into the BizNews business over this time. Taken me like 2 weeks. But anyway, we're through the end now. Lots has been happening. Dawie Roodt's been really, really busy seeing the political, social political issues, and of course, what's happening internationally. We'll get an update from him on what we should be, what we need to know about in a moment. Dawie the chief economist at the Efficient Group. Lovely to have you on the show again, Dawie. Let's start off on the political economy and all the geskreery from the various political parties about who's responsible for the VAT increase not going ahead. Hey, man, does it drive you crazy too?
Completely. Hi, Alec. Very nice talking to you as well. But the thing that really amazes me is that all the political parties have always been against this VAT increase, even the ANC. And they're all trying to get the credit for the VAT that's not going to be increased now. And I had the opportunity to speak to one or two politicians, and I told them, they said yes, but they voted for it on condition of. But you can't do that. You can't vote on condition. You either voted for it or you didn't vote for it. But they're all trying to get the credit for it, including the ANC. They are acting, I don't say this lightly, but they are acting like a bunch of toddlers. The way that they've managed this whole thing. It is, yeah, well, I don't have words. I don't know what to call it.
So, just bottom line the whole thing for us. The ANC didn't want to cut costs, and we spoke about that
Yeah.
last time we had a conversation. You said it's just not in their DNA, it's not in their culture. But now, presumably, they're going to be forced to at least look at cutting costs.
I had a look at let's just put the numbers in perspective here, Alec, and see what we're talking about. We're talking about 75 billion Rand VAT that they're not going to get over 3 years. That's a 3-year period, by the way. So this 0.5% increase would have given, according to the Minister of Finance, about 13.5 billion. I don't think so. I think he would have gotten something like about 10 billion, closer to 10 billion, because the economy is very weak. There's very weak demand in the economy. But still, it's a big amount of money, but in a bigger picture of things, it's not really that much. Let me give you one or two numbers. The Minister of Finance in his bank account, on average, in his bank account, at the exchequer account and the tax and loan accounts, he has something. And let me just repeat the VAT number. The VAT number comes down to about 1 billion Rand per month. That's roughly what it's going to be. So in the bank account of the Minister of Finance is usually approximately 200 billion Rand. That's the balances at the exchequer and at tax and loan accounts of the Minister of Finance. He can write a check of 200 billion Rand. Of course, he needs a float there, but that's the amount of money that he's got in the bank, literally. If you look at the gold and foreign exchange contingency reserve account, for example, that is approximately 350 billion Rand. That fluctuates by as much as 40 billion Rand per month sometimes. So now we nearly brought the government down for a billion Rand per month. It really doesn't make sense. I mean, why didn't they act like adults and discuss this kind of stuff before the time? And now we still don't have a budget. Everything has been put on hold. Everything is upside down. The economy and businesses incurred a lot of cost to implement and then scrap this increase of VAT. And some of them even started charging VAT. So how are you going to untangle this? It's a disaster. I think the Minister of Finance should resign. And I think we should have fresh elections. That's what I think should happen.
That's quite a hectic recommendation, but just unpack for us quickly. You say it's about R1 billion a day, sorry, a month.
A month. Yeah.
And where does the 75 billion come in? Because 3 years is 36 months. So
Yeah. The 1% increase in value added tax will give the Minister of Finance approximately 25 billion Rand. So times, and remember, it's half a percent in this year, then another half a percent, then a full percent sort of thing. And now, if you add it all up over 3 years, it is roughly about 75 billion. But like I've said, I don't think they will get that 75 billion because of the weak economy.
But thanks for clarifying there. We forget, it was 0.5% this year, plus another 0.5% that was coming next year. So it's actually 1%. We mustn't fool ourselves and say, well, it's only 0.5%. Why worry about it? It's substantial. It's a substantial knock onto the economy. Dawie, you think the Minister of Finance should resign and we should have new
Yes.
elections? Explain why.
I think Yeah, I think the Minister of Finance, I think Enoch Ndwala is probably the best that the ANC can offer. And I don't think he was really such. I think he's an okay Minister of Finance. He understands what's going on. But I think the financial market lost confidence in him, certainly. And I think the damage that was caused by the ANC, and I don't think they've got a mandate anymore. I think because do we have do we have a solid government in place? And we certainly do not, because the ANC is waiting for for the DA to leave, and the DA is waiting for the ANC to kick them out. That's basically where we are at the moment. It seems to me as if they're trying to patch things up, and the coalition part of the ANC voted against the budget, for example. Now, if you can't call this a stable political environment, it's certainly not. So maybe they should get in a fresh mandate, and maybe we should go to the polls again.
And that mandate would either be the ANC getting smashed at the polls, according to what we're seeing on the opinion polls that have been published, for instance, by the Social Research Foundation and the IRR, or it would mean a turnaround for the ANC. They get back above 50%, and then they can do what they want.
It's unlikely that they will get above 50%, but I've read the same polls. I think that the ANC will certainly keep on losing. It seems to me the other winners are likely to be the MK and EFF and the DA. Those will be the major winners. But and again, referring to Frans Cronje's stats, his research, it seems to me as if the majority of South Africans actually like the coalition. Or let me put it differently, it seems to me of the majority of South Africans like a political combination, roughly what we have currently. In other words, something between the DA and the ANC, somewhere there. And in fact, I think there's a bit of a vacuum there. There's the possibility of a new, fresh political party perhaps taking up that space. But something in between the DA and ANC, that seems to me as where most South Africans like government to be.
You talk a lot of sense. There are a lot of people saying, "Ja, Dawie weet, hy's reg." But what are the chances of that actually happening? That
No,
the
that's not going
Minister
to
of
happen.
Finance will resign?
No, no, I don't think that is going to happen. I mean, the ANC doesn't do that. They don't take responsibility for anything. That's also not part of their DNA. So no, I don't think he will resign. But I don't think that the government of national unity will see out the full term. I think for the DA did very well. The DA and the EFF, just by the way, they did very well in the way that they managed this whole VAT debacle. But the DA extinguished themselves, and they made it very clear that they are a different political party. Previously, the impression was created by the ANC that the ANC basically swallowed the DA. But I do think it will be wise for the DA to leave the government of national unity a couple of months before the next general election, and just to reestablish their brand and work a little bit on their brand, and to make it clear to the electorate that they are indeed not part of the ANC. So I don't think it will see out its full term, the government of national unity, but it's probably going to limp along like this until a couple of months before the next general election. Will be interesting to see what's going to happen in municipality elections, the local authority elections, which will be next year, if I'm not mistaken, the end of next year.
Or beginning of 2027. So they're coming up soon anyway. It's 18 months or so away from here. They've got a bit of leeway on that.
There's something else happening within the ANC itself. It seems to me as if the various new candidates are throwing their hats in the ring, if that's the right expression. When, for example, Paul Masishile, with the attempted attempt on his life, on and off. I'm not sure really what happened.
What do you
there.
make of that?
No,
What
I
do you
don't
make
know.
of that?
I don't know. I really don't know what
Pellet
happened
gun.
there. I don't.
Neil,
I don't
Neil
haven't
de
got a
Beer.
clue.
Neil de Beer said someone had a go with a pellet gun at a.
I don't know what
at a
happened there.
oh,
And
right.
and then of course it's clear that Fikile Mbalula, he wants to have a run at it as well. Yeah, and who else? Maybe I don't know who else. So it's another possibility. Another scenario certainly is for the president to be recalled, but that will really be bad for the support of the ANC. But just imagine, Alec, here's a scenario. Imagine that the DA decides either gets kicked out or decides to leave the government of national unity, and they call for a no confidence vote in the president. There's a very good chance that they will be successful in that. And that needs a next election, another election. So it will be very dangerous for the ANC to kick out the DA, because he will hand a huge weapon to the DA, because they will just wait for the right moment to pull the trigger, and that will mean the end of the, well, certainly of the president, and maybe the next general election, and a big loss to the ANC as well. So I guess the DA is in a very strong position at the moment. I hope they're going to make use of this muscle.
Before we move off that, because I'd love to get a little bit more of a sense on the economic impact. Helen Zille has been saying that this should be showing South Africans don't vote for small parties because you're really just voting for the ANC or for perpetuation of the status quo. Do you think she's right there, or is that a threat really to democracy if you can't exercise your vote for a little party?
Oh, I think everybody should have the right to stand for something and represent something. But the reality is, these small ones, the rats and mice, they are just making noise. They not really have that much support. And I do like the system that the Germans have, where you have to have at least 5% before you can get real representation. A 1% representation in parliament, it doesn't make sense to me. They're making more noise and more disruptive than anything else. So I think kind of rule like that, I think, is perhaps not a bad idea. So in a way, I guess Helen Zille is right. But obviously what she's actually saying is, don't vote for anybody else but the DA. That's actually what she means.
What about the economy? Now you've unpacked for us what the VAT increase not is going to cost the country. One would presume that will mean some kind of attention on cutting costs within the ANC. First of all, is that possible? And then secondly, what about our economy? Where are we standing at the moment? And are we just going to muddle on for as long as this GNU muddles on?
Okay, let's just look at the economy. The IMF also recently made some estimates on what they think is going to happen to the South African economy, and also in the fiscal accounts, by the way. Well, we had a budget, or kind of budget, the on-off budget we had, and in that budget, the Minister of Finance said that he expected economic growth about 1.8%. Now, this is crucially important, what the economy is growing, the rate of economic growth, because that is the source of revenue to the Minister of Finance. Without a growing economy, he's not going to get tax. So the Minister of Finance said he expects 2.8%, he expects close to, rather 1.8%, he expects close to 2% for the next 3 years. And well, to start off with, I disagree with that number. My number initially, my estimates for 2025 was about 1.5%, the beginning of the year. Now, recently, a lot of things happened. Things like, for example, AGOA is probably gone now, and other tariffs could be, and maybe even some other sanctions. Who knows what's going to come from the United States? And then locally, we had this budget debacle, and we've got political uncertainty in South Africa, and all of that will weigh on economic growth. My estimate for economic growth is roughly about 1% now, perhaps just below 1%. Really, it's so difficult to make an estimate.
But
But
that's
the
terrible,
IMF came
Darby.
out.
Darby, that's a
Yeah, and
shocker. If your
yes,
population's growing at 1.5 and you only
yeah,
growing the economy at 1%, that
yeah,
social unrest is
yeah.
growing, surely.
No, I'm going to give you some numbers just now. So the IMF also came out with a 1%. And I could tell you a little bit of headwind, and we're going to push this economy down to 0.5% growth. Who knows what's going to happen? But you're absolutely right. That means on a per capita basis, we're going to get poorer again. We are, in fact, today where we were last 15 years ago. So the IMF then reckons that economic growth about 1% for South Africa, but they've downgraded or adjusted downwards the rest of the world, basically the US, Sub-Saharan Africa, the world economy. The world economy, according to the IMF, now is likely to be about 2.8%, if I remember correctly. But South Africa, I mean, the Sub-Saharan Africa is likely to grow in excess of 3%. Sub-Saharan Africa, and we are only managing to grow at 1%. Can you believe that? But anyway, so the IMF says because of weak economic growth, the fiscal accounts will also move in the wrong directions. Various ratios, like, for example, the deficit and especially the debt levels. Now, according to the IMF, the debt is likely to stabilize or reach 88% of GDP soon within the next 3 years. Now, that's a bad number, Alec. That is a really, really bad number. And like
Why?
you and I, we've
Why is it a
spoken
bad
about this.
number? Yeah, just explain to people who don't understand. They're hearing what 88% debt to GDP. And we
Okay,
do
let
know
me
that
give
we
you
were
the
once
numbers.
26%. So what the
Okay.
hell are we going to be doing at 88?
Let me give you some numbers. We did talk about VAT earlier, and we said that the VAT revenue, 0.5% increase, would have been approximately 1 billion per month extra to the Minister of Finance. And R1 billion is a 1,000 million. That's R1 billion. Okay. So R1 billion, 0.5% increase in that will give the Minister of Finance R1 billion per month. The total outstanding debt of the state is 5,700 billion rand. 5,700 billion rand. That means it is approximately 100,000 rand for each and every one of us in South Africa. Per capita debt is 100,000 rand to each and every one of us in this country. As a percentage of the whole economy, of everything that we produces in 1 year in South Africa, that is currently about 76% of the economy. Now, that excludes the debt of the local authorities, and they are in very deep trouble as well. That also excludes the debt of the state-owned enterprises, which are in deep trouble as well. And if you include that debt to the current 76% to GDP, then the total debt of this thing that we call government, local authorities, state-owned enterprises, is currently already standing at about 95% of GDP. You have to add another trillion rand or so to that 5,700 billion rand. And then, but that's not what the IMF meant. When they talk about debt to GDP, they talk about only national government, what the Minister of Finance is responsible for. That's the budget. Let's call it the budget debt. And according to the IMF, that's likely to increase to about 88% of GDP. That's serious bad stuff because that debt needs to be funded by somebody. The state borrows money somewhere. They borrow money from insurance companies, from pension funds, from banks, local banks, and even from individuals and the savings industry, the unit trust. Many unit trusts have government debt instruments in them, and of course from foreigners as well. Foreigners, of this 5,700 billion of outstanding debt of the Minister of Finance, approximately 20% of that, the Minister of Finance borrowed from foreigners. And those foreigners are mostly Americans and Europeans. And just imagine if Donald Trump decides he's going to tell his savings industry that they're not allowed to buy or to fund the ANC government anymore. That's going to lead to some serious reaction on the financial markets. But even if nothing happens, if we continue on this trajectory, the private sector must keep on funding the state. And there's always a day when the private sector is going to say, and in fact, the private sector is saying that already, that we do not want to lend you more money because you owe too much money. And if you want to take my money, if you want me to if you want to borrow more money from me, then I'm going to charge you more. And that's exactly what is happening on the capital market, the bond market. Currently, the 30-year bonds are trading at about 11%. Inflation in South Africa is about 3%. That means this is a very attractive investment, by the way. You can get an 8% real return on South African bonds. Nowhere, I don't know if anywhere in the world where you can get, remember, this is theoretically the lowest risk investment that you can make in any country. And that is by buying the government bonds. So you can get an 8% return by buying South African bonds, a real return. Now, where on earth can you get that? But there's a reason for that, of course. And the reason is that the financial markets are pricing in a very high risk premium. So I say this is risky stuff. We don't want to lend the money to this government because they owe too much money. And in the meantime, interest on state debt today is the second most important expenditure item for the Minister of Finance after education. And it keeps on going up and up and up. It's currently about 22% of total revenue is spent on interest on state debt. So that means there's only one thing. Well, there are a couple of things that we can still do. We can increase taxes, but clearly that is politically not going to happen. We can't increase other taxes. The only tax that can make a difference is VAT, by the way. You can't increase the other taxes. That is not available for various reasons. You can borrow more, but then you're going to get into some serious financial troubles, like I've just explained. Or you must do what you should have done a long time ago and start cutting back on state spending. And that's what it's going to be next. That's the new. And there are a few things where you can cut back on. You can cut back on, obviously, if you cut back on spending, you will spend less money on people. And if you spend less money on people, people tend to get angry at you. Now, the people on which you can spend less are 18 million people that receive grants from the state. 18 million of them. Every month, there are 18 million grant recipients in South Africa. And there are, depending on how you define that, about close to 2 million civil servants in South Africa. The civil servants just got a 5.5%. Well, we don't have a budget anymore. But in the budget that was on-off budget, they received a 5.5% increase. Oh, we can't afford that. Now imagine if this 2 million civil servants, if you do not give them that 5.5% increase, what do you think Kusatu is going to say about that? And Kusatu is a tripartite alliance partner. So
It's
we
a
know what.
mess.
I mean,
What a mess.
those
Yeah.
are the difficult choices. You must
Yeah.
spend less money on people and go and tell people you're going to spend less money on them, see what they're going to do.
This ANC government has really taken South Africa to the brink of very, very, very dangerous times. And I guess your initial suggestion, what happened in the budget? We should have a national election. We should move forward and maybe with a clean slate. It's not going to be that
Yeah,
easy. There's a lot to
exactly.
fix. But
No.
what is it going to take? I remember R.W. Johnson wrote that book of How Long Will South Africa Survive? And in it, he said eventually South Africa is going to have to go to the IMF and ask for money. How long is that
No.
going to take? Because now the IMF's always been controlled by the US, who puts most of the money in there. And maybe they say, we don't want to lend you money. What happens then?
No. We don't. And actually, that's one of the things that the ANC did not break in South Africa. Remember, if you go to the IMF, you typically borrow dollars. And the IMF is there to assist countries with balance of payments problems. And what is a balance of payment problem? A balance of payment problem is when I owe South Africa, for example, dollar denominated debt, and I have to pay off my loans because they've fallen due, for example, and I do not have enough dollar reserves. Then I can't pay off my dollar denominated debt, and I will go to the IMF and borrow money from the IMF to pay off this debt. We are not there because the reserves at the South African Reserve Bank is approximately $65 billion. And that is enough to pay off all the dollar denominated debt of the South African of the South African government or of the state. Of this 5,700 billion outstanding debt, approximately 12% of that or so is in dollar denominated, and the Reserve Bank's got enough dollars available. So no, we do not have to go to the IMF. We don't have a dollar problem. We have enough dollars. We've got a rand problem, and we owe a lot of rands to many to South Africans, for example, and also to foreigners, by the way. But here's a snag, and that is, I did mention that foreigners owe approximately 20% of the rand-denominated debt. And if they decide to start selling that, what happens, how the process works, they will sell the South African bonds, and they will receive rands for that, and they will exchange the rands for dollars, and then basically take their dollars out of the country. And that can also potentially deplete the reserves of the South African Reserve Bank, if the Reserve Bank wants to protect the exchange rate of the currency. But they probably wouldn't. So the point I want to make is that although we have enough dollar reserves to pay off our dollar-denominated debt, depending how the Reserve Bank manages a currency crisis, they can quickly run out of that reserves, or the rand can potentially take a huge knock. So, but we don't have to go to the IMF. We have enough dollars to pay off dollars, but we do not have enough money to pay off rands, so to speak, if that makes sense. So something is going to give. Something is going to give. Either the exchange rate is going to go, or we're going to run out of dollar reserves if the Reserve Bank decides to protect the exchange rate. And knowing Lisetse Kanyako, it's unlikely that he will try to protect the currency. He will rather take it on the nose.
People on the hook are South Africans, essentially.
Yes, it's us.
And I suppose ironically, the state public servants have got the biggest pension fund in the country, the PIC, which is most at risk. But it's not just them, it's every single South African who's at risk here, because if the rand falls in the way, and you've really unpacked it well for us, then clearly that means we'll all get poorer in global terms.
Well, the civil servants are actually sitting quite pretty, yeah, because in the end, although they have a pension fund, the government employment pension fund, which is the biggest fund on the African continent, by the way, it is still pretty much fully funded. But it's a defined, what do you call it, defined benefit fund, which means that even if there isn't money in the fund, they will still get their pensions, and you and I, the taxpayer, will have to bail them out. So the civil servants are not on the line for anything. They're going to get their pensions still. The only thing that we will all eventually, when things really start going bad, I think what will happen is that inflation will become a major problem in South Africa. That is usually how things pan out, that inflation becomes a major thing. If your currency bombs out, then it usually spills over into very, very high inflation. Fortunately, we've got somebody like the Siziphiwe Ntlaningeshe here, really running a very tight ship when it comes to monetary policy. So there is actually in a way, there's a lot of dry ammunition in monetary policy, apart from a potential crisis like what we've just discussed. But if necessary, the Reserve Bank can cut interest rates to support the economy. So there is room to cut rates there. He's keeping interest rates actually relatively tight. Let's say Kanyako. But in the case of fiscal policy, fiscal policy is just not available to cushion us from some sort of crisis if something should happen to the economy.
So how does it all end up? Let's say we have that crisis. What happens then? So we have Trump as the crisis.
If we have this crisis, what we're going to see, and if we continue like this, we are going to see this crisis. I promise you, we must turn this around. That we have to turn it around. We need to get the economy to grow. And we can still avert this crisis. There's no doubt about that. But then you have to do basic things. You have to change policy, and you have to make changes in the fiscal accounts and so on. So it can be averted. But if we keep on doing this, the following scenario is likely to play itself out. One day we're going to see the bond market bombing out. The bond market is there to keep everybody on a straight and narrow. Even Donald Trump is scared of the bond market. So one day we're going to wake up and we're going to see bond yields go to 15%, 20%, 25%, something that the yields on that. If that happens, the rands will also weaken. Pick a number. I don't know where it's going to go to. 20 rand, 25 rand, or whatever. That will immediately spill over to a negative impact on the financial markets, especially the banks. The financial stocks will take a huge knock on that because they are very closely linked to the capital market. So the banks' prices will fall, and insurance prices will fall, and other equity prices will fall as well. And all of us will suddenly feel much, much poorer, and we will stop spending in the economy. Demand will disappear out of the economy. The Reserve Bank will have to increase interest rates because petrol price will double overnight because of the much weaker currency and things like. And then the economy is going to go into a tailspin, much, much weaker economic growth and everything that goes with that. Negative recession, a deep recession, and all the bad things that go with that. So that's what we are heading for if we don't turn this fiscal ship around. And there's only one way to do things that we must do. We must put measures in place to get this economy to grow faster, but that means an ideological change. And the second thing that we must do, the state must spend less. Really. And eventually the financial markets will force us to do this. See what Javier Milei is doing in Argentina. That's exactly what he's doing. He's cutting state spending because we need, the markets are forcing him to do that. And rather do it while you still are more or less in charge than wait for the financial markets to force you to do it.
Dawie Roodt is the chief economist at the Efficient Group. I'm Alec Hogg from BizNews.com.